My name is Gaia Athena and today I'm bringing you a book review of Het Idee M by Asha and Broeke. This is a Dutch non-fiction book and it is about where the ideas come from, that there are differences between men and women. Now I know that most of you probably can't read this book because I don't think this has been translated into English. But what I thought I would do instead is tell you about the ideas of the book, because I think that could be an interesting discussion. If you've been following my channel for a while, then you might have seen some other videos as well that dealt with certain gender things. I talked about gender norms in my review of Tomboy by, I want to say Les Prince, but I have to look that up, as well as in a couple of other book reviews. I'm going to try to explain what the ideas are of this book. So if you do want to read this book and you don't want to be spoiled for the more details of all the chapters and everything, then you might want to click off now. But because it's a non-fiction book and I'm trying to do a discussion and I don't think many people can read this book, I think it's okay if I talk about the ideas from it, but it's not all on the back, of course. You need to read the book, so feel free to click it off. I will briefly go through the book and discuss some of the things that it talks about. For example, chapter 1 is titled Mannen van Mars, Vrouwen van Venus, which I can translate as Men from Mars, Women of Venus. Men of Mars, Women of Venus. Which is an idea that has been described in quite a few popular psychology books. Says this book, those ideas state that men and women have been different since prehistory, and that this will never change. And this book says that that's not true. I should mention the author talks about a lot of research, and she refers to a lot of research and books and everything. So it's not just her own ideas, it's also that she gets a lot from research and things. And I have to say, I had heard of like some of these, like, so she says in that it kind of started with John Gray writing a book called, and I have to translate here because it's obviously the Dutch title here, Men Come From Mars and Women From Venus. She says, the author, that John Gray, the author of this book, says the problem of a lot of relationship isn't this, that men and women are so different that they're from different, that they could as well be from different planets. So this is kind of rambling all over the place. I'm actually ill right now, when I'm filming this, but I'm gonna try and get the points of this book across. And this book, which became very popular and sold many copies in lots of countries, and it's kind of the story that way back in the prehistory, the men hunted and the women gathered fruits, berries, nuts, and took care of the children. What the author of this book is basically saying is that she does not think this is true, and what she instead is saying that differences that people seem to perceive are not actually there, in the sense that individual differences between people are way more important than the differences between, if you were to divide a group of people up into men and women. And I should phrase this whole review by saying that I personally believe that there are more than two genders, that I definitely don't mean to offend anyone who is non-binary or who identifies as something different than man and woman. I'm discussing the book now. Anyway, the author says, and I'm sorry that this is all over the place, I'm gonna try to make something of it, editing, that the individual differences between people are way more important. When she talks about certain research, she states that between individual people, the differences are a lot more widespread than specifically men versus women, or women versus men. And what she thinks is that she also says that about 80 to 90% of the people actually have unconsciously, subconsciously I should say, subconsciously have this certain kind of image in their head that the women should stay home and take care of the children and the men should go out and work. This is based on some research by some people that she talks about and links to research and stuff. I mean references. And she also talks about epigenetics. Is that how you should translate it? I'm gonna say epigenetics, but if that is in fact not how it's translated, then I will try to put it on the screen. But in Dutch she names this epigenetica. And what this basically is, she does not think that the genes of a person specifically are important, because let's face it, the X and Y chromosome are just one pair of chromosomes versus all the other ones we have. But what she is saying is that epigenetics, which is whether a gene is being expressed or not, is triggered by the environment. So how the parents raise a child, how at school the other children act. For example, one of the researches that she cites is that, for example, some parents, when their child is young, are already priming their child with certain gender ideas. Like, girls are given dolls, boys are given cars and stuff. Girls' rooms are pink, boys' rooms are blue, that sort of thing. It starts from an early age, and even if the parents are being quite like, you can play with all the toys, which that's very much how my parents were, then at school the other children and also the teachers are important in that they can influence the child. Well, I can't, this book contains so much that I can't really explain everything here from memory. I'm attempting to do so, as you can tell. So chapter 1 was about men of Mars and women of Venus. Chapter 2 is about that we see what we want to see, which talks about, for example, some research among certain apes and primates, as well as certain, I think, tribes is how I would translate it, and how if the researchers are focused only on finding, let's say, certain things that they are, for example, not seeing some other parts. I'm sorry, it's hard to explain all this. Then the chapter after that is called Genesis 2.0 or 2.0, and this chapter is a lot about the epigenetics I was just describing to you. So she talks about some research with, for example, twins and gene expression and how genes can be activated through what happens in the environment. And after each chapter, I should point this out, after each chapter there are a few pages of notes in which she talks more about, she cites all the researchers, as well as she gives some extra, sometimes some extra thought behind certain things, or where a certain quote or something came from, or stuff like that. Now chapter 4 is called, how to translate it, the big, like, knead the dough, is that like a, I'm saying I'm way too much into the video. Like the big molding, the big shaping, forming of the person, and there is quite a lot of, she talks about a lot of research about like preconceptions and stereotype conceptions and biases, or for example how certain parents respond to their children. And in this she talks about this research in which a group of students, she included, but it's in all the research, the professor played some baby crying, and then asked the students, what do you think this baby is feeling? And so there were 2 fragments, and like the first one it was said that the first one is a girl, and when people thought that the girl was crying, they thought that the child was afraid, and when the fragment of the boy, people thought that the boy was angry. And it turns out the two sound fragments, is that sound samples? I'm not sure how to translate that. Were actually exactly the same. So what that it basically says, if when people think they hear a boy or a girl baby cry, they assign different meanings to the crying. Anyway, I see that I've been talking for a while already, so it's hard to discuss the whole book. I could, and I didn't make any notes or anything, so I'm have to do this all from like memory whilst reading the book. Which I know there are people who like annotate their books and stuff, and I've never done that or never tried that. And I think I would also maybe find it tiring if you have to, with every single book, think about that. So I normally do everything from memory, which is not always a good idea. With a book like this, I can certainly see that leaving some notes for myself or something would have been useful. So the next chapter is about, yeah, I don't really know how to translate this title, because each of the words individually could have different translations, and so I was planning to talk in this video more about how it's affected me, because, well, I like my reviews to be personal. As I said before, when I grew up, I was allowed to play with any sort of toys, and all sorts of toys were offered to me, or, you know, I was allowed to pick something or stuff like that. I played with boat cars, Lego, Barbies, all sorts of things and figures. I should point out that something I played a lot was with the Barbies. My sister and I. No, what I should first say is that I wasn't really that interested in Barbies or dolls until my sister got interested in them, and my sister is 2 years younger than me. And once she was interested, I wanted to join in as well. Until then, I played, I guess, more with Legos and cars that I can remember. I'm sure there were other things too, but that's just two things that I remembered. And what my sister and I did with the Barbies was not, I'm just gonna put the book down for a minute, was not like dressing them and brushing their hair too much and things like that. But what we did was we played out these stories that we made up on the go, all sorts of different stories, and always really enjoyed that. And we didn't just make these stories with Barbies, sometimes we would play stories with the cars or with other figures we have. And insofar as the school situation, I was seen as pretty different. Kids are pretty good at detecting when somebody is, well, that, you know, my autism. So I guess most of them maybe sometimes knew that like something was kind of off, but I didn't know what it was. So I've always been kind of an outsider. I did have a few friends through primary school. In the early years of primary school, those were both boys and girls. And later on in the primary school, or rather it was, I think, like, yeah, it was mostly a couple of girls. Also a bit more outsider girls, if that makes sense. Like, yeah. In high school, I mostly had a few girls as my friends, but at some point I also had a boy as a friend who at some point became my boyfriend and then my ex. And I always, this has maybe not much to do with the book, but I always thought it was really strange that when I became friends with a teenage boy as a teenage girl, and that people were always on my case about that, whereas lots of my classmates were friends with like boys and girls, not having a relationship but just being friends, and suddenly I get a friend who happens to be male and all of a sudden this is a huge deal. Anyway, that's been bothering me all through high school, and I just had to put that in there because at the time I couldn't really tell because, yeah, it always bothered me that some toys were marketed towards boys and some toys were marketed towards girls. For example, the girl toy, at least the adverts back in the day on TV, would contain lots of pink and, for example, like Barbie dolls or dolls, whereas the boys' adverts would be more, what I remember, like brown and grey, you know, Action Man, those kinds of things. It's just what I remember. And it would even be to the point where, now my family didn't often go to McDonald's or anything, but McDonald's had sometimes gendered Happy Meals. And as kids, I have a brother and a sister. My sister's 2 years younger than me and my brother's 7 years younger than me. We all liked to get the Happy Meals when we went to McDonald's. We would usually, often go on holiday in France once a year, and on the way to the south of France we would then eat at McDonald's, so sometimes, and then we would always get a Happy Meal because that's what we wanted. And I loved it the most when the Happy Meals were gender neutral, when there was no difference. For example, the Disney figurines from The Lion King, those were some of my favorites. But when there was a gendered Happy Meal, and it was usually then girls pink, boys blue, and specific toys that were marketed toward that gender, I sometimes actually asked my dad, can you ask at the counter for a boys one, because I like those toys more. He had to do that quite a few times, and obviously I could not be near him then when he did that. And my sister, I think, mostly wanted the girl ones, and my brother mostly wanted the boy ones. And like I said, for me, it really depended on what the exact toys were. This might be taking the subject of the book a bit far. Oh, I have completely forgotten to mention one specific point. Let me talk about that first. The book basically thinks that these differences between men and women do not come from the prehistory. She believes that all of the adults in the prehistory, they were all trying to find food. She does not believe in the men hunt, women gather. There is very little evidence for that, she says. What she does think is that when humans became farmers, so switched from hunter-gatherers to farmers, 13,000 years ago, roughly, that is when it was no longer necessary for everybody to be involved in the food hunting gathering. So then you kind of got that split that some of the men became farmers, the women often had children and had to take care of the children, and some of the other men got to do like a craft, like becoming a smith, or, well, I can't think of much else right now. I'm trying to translate it from my memory. I hope I'm getting that point across. So she thinks that it's much newer, this sort of split, and she is much more of a thing that it's more in our heads and in our society, but it should not be necessary. It in the last chapter also talks about how these biases, I don't think is the right word. I need to look this up. Prejudice. Okay. It seems the word I'm looking for is not really biases, but more prejudice and stereotypes. Okay, so I shall use that word. How difficult it can be to get rid of these, but also what you can do, and how 10% of the people very much are able to defeat these subconscious images that a lot of us have. And one of the things she also talks about in, I think, the last chapter is the connection with race, and how psychologists have also looked into, because men, women, in which case there is a discrimination against women who work and men who care for their children. That with race, it is also that black people and people of color are sometimes discriminated against versus white people, And I really liked that she talked about this in the last chapter, because I have been wondering about this the whole book. Because I think both the gender thing as well as the race, I think these issues are very racism. It's all very important, I think, and it's important that we talk about it. And so I've been waiting for her to see if she would bring that up, and she did. And maybe not always like 100% excellently, but I like that she talked about it. And she talked about racism in America a bit. When I say America, I mean the United States of America. I personally feel using the word America for the United States is deceiving, because there is also South America. But it is what a lot of people in the Netherlands use, so often I still say it. But I don't intend to offend anybody. I'm fighting against it, but I've been grown up hearing all those words and having those ingrained in me, and it's only recently that I'm thinking about, I'm finding this wording not quite right, so I'm trying to change it. Anyway, I think it's good that she also discusses racism and race and all that in this book. A little bit. She touches on it a little bit. And she touches on some research with that. And anyway, so this review is already unbelievably long. In short, I thought this book was very interesting. It made me think about some things, because I have wondered how, you know, some people say that there are huge differences between men and women, and that we're born that way and all that. And for example, women are said to talk more, all these things, and she mentions all these things and then shows through research how they're just not true. And I really appreciated that, because I very much agree with it. And while I think I very much agree with the fact that individual differences between people are a lot more important than whether someone is a man or a woman. It was very nice to not only read from a perspective that I agree with for the most part, but also see her like logically and with research and like debating it, if that makes sense, and explaining it. And yeah, I really appreciated that. It's a shame that I don't think it's been translated. It's a shame more people can't read it. I hope lots of Dutch people read it. I had never heard of it until I found this at a recent library sale. This book is published in 2010. I had never heard of it. I found it at a library sale. It sounded like it could be interesting, so I picked it up. And it was actually, yeah, it made me think. And anyway, like I've said in previous videos, yeah, the whole thing with the gender was, see, and since early this year as well, I've been thinking about that a lot. For example, I have a friend who is trans, so I've been thinking a lot about these things and learning a lot about them for the past, well, this whole year basically. But especially since, well, I'm not sure exactly when, it could have been last year, but like the past so many months. And I've also been thinking about like my own, anyway, I talked about this in a previous video, but for those of you who haven't seen that, I identify as a woman. I am a woman. I don't wear makeup, I have long hair, but I dress in a more, I prefer wearing trousers over skirts or dresses most of the time, almost all of the time. I don't like wearing high heels at all. I always wear shoes with no heels, and I suppose a little bit more like manly shoes a bit at that, but my feet are quite narrow, so I do have to buy them from the women's department. I know there's also non-binary people out there, and I can kind of like understand from my own perspective. See, when I was in high school and also in primary school, I tried very hard to fit in with the other children and other teenagers, and it never worked. They always said that something was different about me, and it made me very unhappy to pretend to be someone that I was not. So I learned that it made me much happier just to be myself, even if that meant that most children, classmates, teenagers, I learned this in high school, would not like me very much or accept me very much. Being true to yourself is so much better. And I was bullied, but I felt happier just being able to be true to myself. Where was I going with this? So I used to care a lot about what other people think, and over the years I've grown, and I am now a bit more in a position where I do care what people think, but I also like to be true to myself. And if who I am truly as a person is not alright with somebody, then I don't know how I can really explain this, but like, if someone is bothered by the fact, I am sorry people, I am, like I said, I've been a bit ill the past few days. Like, I do care what people think, but I'm not going to change drastically who I am or how I look or how I present myself because some person doesn't think that I am feminine enough or anything like that. Does that make any sense? I am who I am with my autism, my ADD, the way I look. I don't wear makeup. Sometimes I do feel a bit left out when there are certain, for example, ads that, you know, nowadays they have sort of personalized ads, right? And if they know that you're a woman versus knowing that you're a man, they give you different ads. And so I get ads for makeup sometimes on YouTube, Instagram, whatever. On the TV, you see it. And for example, in movies or TV shows, almost all the time, on TV, women often wear makeup, especially those of my age. Now, of course, all the actors are wearing some makeup, probably to make it look good on the camera. So that's not what I mean, but sometimes if a movie or a TV show is maybe about like girls versus boys, or a book even, I don't mean as in this non-fiction book that I just read, but I mean as in a fictional story, I find then that I don't always am fully on the side of women, if that makes sense. But then, like, if I used to play a lot of video games back in the day. Nowadays, still a bit, but not so much anymore as I used to. And it always bothered me so much when in a video game you're never really referred to it as like a specific character, but then when all of a sudden the video game is referring to you as he, that always bothered me so much. Like, I'm happy that nowadays we see a bit more games where you can also play as a female character, and I definitely think there should be more games as well where you should be allowed to play, or where you can play as neither men nor women, but be called the singular they. But anyway, I struggled with my gender for a while, thinking about it, but I am a woman, and the pronoun she, that's what I've heard all my life, and that's what I identify with. But it does bother me when, for example, I see these adverts about makeup and make yourself look better and, you know, whatever. I don't care about makeup. Now, if I know some of, like, if people do makeup on their YouTube channels, and, you know, then I do watch some of it. But I mean, for myself, I don't want to buy makeup. I don't want to have it on my face. But, you know, perfume is a whole other thing. But, I'm making this way too long. I am very sorry. I hope I can make some of this in editing, because this has been all over the place. My reviews lately have been quite long and rambly. I'm gonna try and make it a bit shorter for like the next, whatever it is I'm planning next. Overall, I found this book very interesting. It had very interesting ideas. It's definitely something that I've always thinking about for a while, as I have been thinking about it, as I tried to understand why society is the way that it is. Which is something that I've always struggled with. I've always struggled to understand other people. Well, with my autism, it meant that I didn't know a lot of the social rules. I felt like I was playing a game and I was one of the few people who was, or it felt like I was the only one who wasn't given the rule book. That sort of thing. People make facial expressions. I don't know what they mean. Yeah, I've always, all my life I've been trying to understand other people and what their body language means and why people think the way that they do, because I think differently than some people. I have learned a lot over the years by reading books, a lot of fiction books but also non-fiction books, by learning about what a character feels like when they're in certain situations. I can then learn from that and extrapolate the social rules and extrapolate how does a person feel when they're in this situation. So if I encounter a real person in this situation, how might they feel? And yeah. Anyway, personally, I think people should do what they like. If you're a woman, you don't want to wear makeup, then don't. And if you're a man who does want to wear makeup, then do. Because I don't mind. You do you. Like, I think people should be who they want to be. Now, I realise, of course, in some cases that could be unsafe. So that's an all other subject. But let's not get into too many things here. I wish that society was more tolerant of people who are different, of people who are different from these supposed ideas, and that we could all just truly be who we are and all love one another and all be kind to every other person, because we're all here currently, all on planet Earth together, though I don't know if in the future we might go elsewhere, or whether someone non-human may ever be watching this. Who knows? But yeah, I'm probably maybe a bit naive, some people would say, but we're all people, so let's all just be nice to each other, you know? Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. If anything was not clear, feel free to ask me in the comments, or give your opinion on, like, whether you think there are a lot of differences between men and women. You know, yeah, I'm sorry. I seem to, the last few book reviews I've made, I seem to have finished books on days that I wasn't feeling well. I was feeling fine a few days ago, but that was not, I hadn't finished this book then, so I couldn't do a book review. So to be honest, I didn't really feel like filming this video, but once I finished the book, I wanted to film the video before I forget what's in the book. Anyway. Okay, I think this has been way too long. If you are still watching, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and maybe we'll talk in comments. Bye!